Thank you so much for allowing me to present my work to you this afternoon as a pre-recording, and many thanks to Dr. Billings for agreeing to run the presentation for me and to answer all of your questions at the end. My name is Kristen Vandegreen. I'm a PhD student in Health Promotion, Education, and Behavior at the University of South Carolina, and I'm also a graduate student in the certificate program for Women's and Gender Studies. Last summer, I had the honor of doing a research project in Bangladesh with women and girls who experience sexual violence. I'll get to the methods of our study in just a few minutes, but first I wanted to tell you a little bit about Bangladesh. As you can see, it's a very densely populated and low-income country. Dhaka is the capital and is the largest, most densely populated city in Bangladesh. And that is where I conducted my research. Our project was centered at ICDDRB, which is a world-renowned research institution located in Dhaka. And they have been around for many years and have developed some pretty amazing life-saving solutions that have been shared globally. Violence against women is a serious human rights violation and a huge public health problem with severe economic and personal costs. I will point you to the WHO multi-country study for a more in-depth look at the consequences of violence against women. This was an extensive study that really sheds light onto the problem at a global level. As you can see, between 10 and 30% of women in the world have been sexually abused in their lifetime. Up to 1/3 of adolescent girls in the world report their first experience was forced, and most women are sexually assaulted by someone that they know. Sexual violence is one specific type of violence against women, and that was the focus of our study. Other types of violence include emotional violence and physical violence, harassment, and various other activities that you can also find in the WHO multi-country study. Part of our goal was to better understand service seeking, and what we know globally is that women are reluctant to seek services after a sexual assault, and it's really important to consider women's safety when conducting research on violence against women. In Bangladesh specifically, sexual violence against women is extremely high. Among ever married women, 30% in Dhaka and 50% in Matlab reported ever experiencing sexual violence by their husbands. Violence was higher in urban poor areas of Dhaka, and when we talk about urban poor areas, they're also known as slums. I prefer not to call them those, even though that's what they're called in the literature, and that's actually what people in Dhaka and in Bangladesh call them. Few studies actually exist on the services for women who have been sexually assaulted, especially in Bangladesh. One study, a very important study, was actually conducted by Dr. Billings and her colleagues on service seeking in Guatemala, and that really sheds some light into the decision-making process and what actually happens when people do seek services. The purpose of our study was to understand and document the challenges of conducting research with women and girls who've experienced sexual abuse. Also to document the experience of women and girls who are survivors of sexual assault living in Bangladesh, and to better understand their decision-making process in seeking healthcare, legal, and counseling services. We wanted to identify the barriers and facilitators of those services, assess the quality of them, and overall to be able to offer recommendations for overcoming barriers for women who want to access services. We conducted qualitative, in-depth interviews. They were between 1 and 1.5 hours. The interviews were conducted in Bengali by Bengali-speaking interviewers. Because I don't speak Bengali, we had other members of our research team conduct the interviews, and because this is such a sensitive topic, we felt that having a translator in the room would not be appropriate. We recruited participants from a larger study that's going on at our ICDDRB, along with some of their colleagues, called the SAFE study. We also recruited participants through referrals from local service agencies and through snowball sampling. We recruited participants who had experienced violence. They were between 10 and 29 years old, living in the urban poor areas of Dhaka. In the end, we conducted in vivo coding of the interviews, the field guides, notes, memos, and email correspondence. One question that's commonly asked is whether or not participants were reimbursed, and they were not. We felt that because these were very extremely poor women, that it would be unethical to offer them reimbursement for their time because they often can't afford to buy food or anything like that, and so that would cause them undue incentive to participate. We also interviewed key informants who were service providers and community leaders, and these are just some sample questions. All of the consent forms and interview guides were in English and translated into Bengali and then back translated to double check that they were consistent and accurate. All of our key informants were located in Dhaka City. 13 women participated in our study, 12 of whom experienced sexual violence and physical violence, and 1 woman experienced severe physical intimate partner violence. All of the women we interviewed were above the age of 18, were Bengali, Muslim, and lived in an urban poor area of Dhaka City. 3 of the women had no education, 6 had completed some primary school, 4 had some secondary, and none of the women had higher secondary education. All 13 women had been married at one time, though 3 were separated from their husbands because they had abandoned them. 8 of the women earned personal income, and 5 women were unemployed and worked as homemakers in their own homes. All of the names and ages of our participants in these quotations have been changed to protect their confidentiality and their safety. I'm going to go ahead and let you read the quotations from the women while I give you a little bit of background information about our results. Many of the women were emotionally abused by their husbands, including being belittled, controlled, humiliated, insulted, threatened, stripped of economic support, and abandoned. All but one of our participants had been beaten by their husbands. Often husbands' physical violence escalated from slapping and punching to severe beatings and the use of objects to harm their wives. All but one of our participants had experienced sexual violence. All but one of the women who had experienced sexual violence were forced by their husbands to have intercourse. This often happened on a regular basis. The woman who had never been sexually assaulted by her husband had experienced sexual violence as a child. Most women did not tell anyone about being sexually or physically abused. If they did seek help, it was more often from family members or neighbors than from a service provider. Rather than directly seeking help, family members and neighbors would often hear the violence taking place and come to the women first to offer help or advice. Women did not tell anyone about their experiences of violence because they felt ashamed or embarrassed. They thought that neighbors would gossip, or they believed that arguments and violence are a personal matter between a husband and a wife. Many times, family, friends, and neighbors did not provide help, even when they knew that women were being abused. This occurred because they were fearful of the abuser or because they were trying to mind their own business. Women did not seek help from police or legal services because they did not have money, they did not want to shame themselves or their husbands, they felt there was no use to reporting, or they were afraid of what the husbands would do if they reported the violence. A few of the women believed that it was okay for a husband to beat his wife. Others believed that it was a sin for a woman to cause pain to her husband by reporting. Bribery is a reality in Bangladesh, and while police are not supposed to accept bribes, the common understanding among many Bengalis is that they will accept them. which, as I mentioned, is a barrier for women who do not have money to pay. Sometimes women seek help from local arbitrators, such as community leaders or chairmen. There are two separate legal processes that people can choose in Bangladesh, formal and informal. This help seeking of local leaders is an example of informal. Sometimes women sought services from pharmacies, local midwives, or the hospital, or they were taken there by family members, neighbors, or friends. Women refused to tell healthcare provider the truth about how they were injured in order to protect their husbands from repercussions and to protect themselves from shame. The few women who did seek healthcare generally felt that they received high-quality care. Almost all of the participants were unaware of any other services that were offered besides police, local arbitrators, and pharmacies and hospitals for women who experience violence, such as nonprofits, women's centers, crisis centers, or legal aid. All of the women who said that they did or would seek any type of professional service in the future would rather speak to a woman service provider about her experiences than to a man. Other women decided that they might like to seek services in the future, while most women were adamant that they would never do so. Many women would like to have the option to seek services at an agency that would work with men in their lives to help them change their ways. Other women would like men to be punished for their actions. Additionally, women want changes in their society or their local areas. Women would like society to be different so that violence against them is not so common and is not supported by people in the community. One woman suggested that changing poverty, women's status, and marriage practices might reduce violence against them. For the discussion section of this talk, we're going to focus on the many barriers that women have for seeking services. A lot of the barriers are cultural because violence is seen as a normal part of marriage. They're religious because reporting violence may be seen as a sin. They perceive that reporting is useless, that there are no benefits to reporting, and that service providers will not believe them or will take the husband's side. There are financial barriers, emotional barriers, relational barriers, and that they want to protect their husbands from shame. There are barriers to their safety. If abusers find out that they sought services, they may retaliate against the women. And awareness is also a huge barrier. Most often, women were unaware of local services. It's really important for researchers to consider, anticipate, and incorporate the cultural and contextual challenges of conducting research with women who have experienced violence. Women's safety is a priority throughout the research process, and researchers need to recognize this and create logistics and budgets and a timeline that reflects this priority. Additional information on overcoming the challenges of conducting research on violence against women was presented by our team as a poster at the Women's Health Forum earlier this year. These are the many references used for this presentation. I would like to acknowledge the groups who funded our research, or my research, my part of it in particular: the Katie Memorial Foundation, the Department of Health Promotion, Education, and Behavior, and the Women's and Gender Studies Harriet Hampton Fawcett Award. I'd also like to give a special thanks to my mentors, Dr. Deborah Billings and Dr. Ruchira Naved, and especially to our participants. The information that you provided to us is invaluable. Thank you.